So welcome to this updated forecast really for 2021. Today is March 21st. I did this originally January, and January I gave my predictions, and you can have a look at that as well. That's available on YouTube if you want to have a look at the kind of longer predictions. But for today, I'm going to go through a recap of those main predictions and forecasts and maybe update it slightly. There aren't really many changes. I still kind of think that what I predicted at the beginning of the year is what's going to pan out. It seems to be already panning out. What I predicted in January seems to be coming true already. But maybe look at the long term again, because every time we look at this as astrologers, we get a kind of more insights into the long term effects. So but for today, anyway, it's very much about, looking at the year 2021 without going beyond that much, even though I'm sure anyone listening now is listening to this because they're interested in when is the pandemic likely to end. And unfortunately, there isn't, and of course, you know this without even asking, you know that there isn't a, oh, it's over on a certain date, because that just isn't the case. It's more of a case of, and I'll show you again the slide referring to the Spanish flu. It's more of a case that it slowly peters out. It's not going to be like you're going to wake up one morning and then, oh, it's over. And it's been officially, it's officially over now, even though they probably will, the WHO will probably at some point make that statement. So I'll talk about that in at the end really of this, in terms of the longer term forecast. But for 2021, these are the main transits to focus on. And if you're not familiar with the sidereal zodiac that I use, and that most Eastern astrologers or Indian astrologers, or what's termed Vedic astrologers use, this is more astronomically correct and lines up with the actual constellations more so than the tropical Western, which is more symbolic and seasonal. And that's why, and I don't say one is better than the other. I look at both, but I use this one more. And this is what I work with when I do readings. So it just has this kind of more pinpointed approach, really, when you look at the astronomical data. So Jupiter is still in Capricorn, but the good news is, and what I wasn't really able to say last time in January, the good news is that by the 5th of April, it'll move into Aquarius. So that's some good news, certainly, because Jupiter in Aquarius is most definitely not as bogged down as it is in Capricorn as it has been since last March. So in March 2020, Jupiter moved into Capricorn, and that came after the conjunction of Saturn and Pluto. And when you put all three of them together, Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto, all in Capricorn, it really restrains everything, and growth is, diminished. Hope is lost. Everybody is losing faith at this point because Jupiter is seen as in its debilitation in Capricorn. So there is a sense of all hope is lost at this stage. But recently you might have got a sense of, despite, another wave of the virus, and I'll talk about that and why that is right now. You might also, though, have got a sense of this light at the end of the tunnel. And this is what this Jupiter transition now into Aquarius is all about this year. Now, unfortunately, and again, being an astrologer, we have to kind of dance between this, have to walk this fine line between being a doomsayer, which we're often labeled, and then, not telling it, as it is, and not predicting what happened and not giving forewarning. So I'm constantly having to walk this fine line. So the fine line is that any hope that's been brought about in 2021 is just a preview of the better transits in 2022. So that we still have another year to get through in terms of whatever starts in 2021. And there will be more hope in 2021 for sure. Like I said, as soon as Jupiter moves into Aquarius, there might be some new ways of dealing with it. The summer is definitely more hopeful, and in particular the month of May. It starts in April. Things get a lot better. I'll show you that in the chart. and then in May especially. There are complications, of course, throughout the summer where people, I think, will be really, what we're seeing now is just the tip of the iceberg of uprising and people getting out onto the streets and protesting. And I think that will be more so in the summer. But throughout all of this, Jupiter in Aquarius is going to offer more hope. So what they do in India when Jupiter goes into Aquarius, and it happens every 12 years, is that they have the Kumbh Mela festival, the biggest spiritual gathering on the planet. It's the biggest gathering of people on the planet anywhere. And it's Kumbh Mela, it's called. Kumbha is the Sanskrit name for pot or Aquarius. And Mela means gathering. So it happens when Jupiter goes into Aquarius. The big one happens when Jupiter goes into Aquarius. And so that happens in April. The biggest bathing festival is in April when the sun goes into Aries. So it's definitely this sense of new beginning, a new sense of what's possible in April, from the middle of April. And you might not be able to see that right now where you're at, whatever's going on in your own life, but there is a sense of new hope coming in. But again, the longer term picture is that this is temporary. There is a sense of whatever is put in place now in the summer of 2021 has to go back, because Jupiter will retrograde and go back into Capricorn in September. So by September, it goes back into Capricorn until November. And then by November, it goes back into Aquarius. So it's going to go this back and forth. And so as I predicted like years ago, like 2 or 3 years ago now, when I saw this Jupiter going in and out of Capricorn 3 times, so it's unusual, I knew that there'll be a lot of ups and downs. And I didn't predict a pandemic as such, but I knew there'd be a lot of challenges in the world, and I knew there'd be a lot of ups and downs. And this is what a virus is like. Like if you've ever had a virus yourself personally, you know, apart from the COVID virus, you know that when a virus gets into your system, it's like you go through a kind of up and down with it, you know. Because viruses can go into remission, of course, and all of that. They can go into hiding, and then they get triggered again. And if you think of any of the viruses like the you know, shingles and things like that, how it can get reactivated later. Those kind of viruses that kind of come and go, you know, there's this sense of really up and down. And so Jupiter in Capricorn, again, because it's restricted in Capricorn, it means that the autumn time is going to bring further restrictions, unfortunately. That's what it looks like. And because on top of that, Saturn and Pluto are still together in Capricorn and then waiting for Jupiter to return, it means that there will likely be more restrictions. And of course, Jupiter, again, being the biggest planet, representing growth, that also means growth is again restricted, and that means the economy is really challenged for the year, up and down all year. Anyway, so I'll go through these maybe a bit more, but that's really the main theme. Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto, and Capricorn. It doesn't happen very often, and when it does, there's huge turmoil on the planet. There's plagues, there's pandemics. That's literally been the case in history. And we have to kind of keep this in perspective, that it's not going to last forever. We've only been through a year of it. 1 year. You know, let's remind ourselves, it's been 1 year. The Spanish flu was, you know, 2 years. It's going to take its time. It's going to take another year to get out of this. By next year, next summer in particular, 2022, Saturn will actually move into Aquarius as well. Again, only for the summer, just as Jupiter is doing it this year. Next year, Saturn moves into Aquarius for the summer, goes back into Capricorn in the winter, and then finally, at the beginning of 2023, moves into Aquarius for good. So it means that it's going to, in other words, incrementally lift in the next year or two. And so there's not going to be any one sort of, oh, we're out of the pandemic, unfortunately. There's going to be sort of like a lift and then a retreat and then a lift and a retreat, and slowly getting better each time. So this summer it's getting better, next summer even better. That's the overall view of what's going on. I mentioned in the January forecast, you can go back and look at that if you wish, more in detail about this shift in Capricorn, in this lunar sign here, Uttarashada and Shravana. These are the Indian names for these lunar mansions that divide up Capricorn. So there's this slight shift that's been going on this year as well. Now, Shravana is interesting. I'm going to talk about it a bit more, and Saturn's transit in Shravana in particular. So maybe I'll leave that to when I get to that slide. So another thing is that Saturn is square Uranus all year, and it comes back again next year. But this year, for certain, this is exact this year, and this is quite a challenge. And again, why it shows incremental release, because Uranus is all about like revolution and, you know, freedom, and that's going to bring a lot of surprises, but it's in a square to Saturn, so it's constantly restricted or restrained. And if you looked at what was going on yesterday in all the protests around the world and in London, I think there was especially a big one. People are getting, obviously, you know, it's springtime now, people are rearing to go out and be free, and yet they can't because Saturn is still holding them back. So this is going to get more tense throughout the year because now Mars has been in a square and it's going to go into an opposition, and that actually occurs in June, July. This is when I think there'll be major protests, and restraining people will be a big theme in the summer. But then again, in the autumn time, in October, November, that will also be the case because Saturn will be again in a square to Mars. It already happened in January, February. That was the theme then. We're now in March. But again, by the end, October, November. And because Jupiter will be back in Capricorn, October, November, and Mars will be in a square to Saturn, I think the autumn time is going to be very challenging for people because of, you know, having another year of not being let, you know, loose and allowed to do what we want to do and travel and so on. And any kind of restriction that is likely to come in then is going to be felt really quite intensely. So I think October, November are actually going to be the most challenging times of the year in many respects. I'll talk about the eclipses as well when we get to that, because they're the ones that are actually triggering all of this. And another wave has been triggered right now because Mars has just joined the North Node. That happens this month in March. And so the last time Mars joined the South Node was the beginning of the pandemic, actually. That was that's what the trigger was. So now Mars has joined the North Node in March, and that is triggering another wave. It will join the South Node again in December, and there'll be a total solar eclipse in December. So that is likely another wave by the end of the year in the winter this year. But by then, I do believe that we're going to be really a long ways through this. And I think in a way that'll be the virus's last hurrah in many ways this winter, or the coming winter, I mean, 2021 into 22. Because Mars conjunct the South Node in Scorpio, this is happening in Scorpio, this is a total solar eclipse in Scorpio. I do think that that's overcoming the virus ultimately. That's what will happen. This is an Indian term, Kala Sarpa. Kala is time, Sarpa is serpent. So this serpent of time combination is when all the planets are on one side of these nodes, which I'll show you now in a while. So the main themes of this year are, this is something I went through again. I haven't changed these slides since January. I'm just going to go through it again. And you can look back on the other presentation if you wish. I'm going to just whiz through this. These are the themes for the year: movement, education, connection, preservation, resources, or the lack thereof. Because of the transits, especially in Capricorn and Saturn there, it's all about movement. The Shravana sign in particular, I mentioned the lunar mansion in Capricorn is all about movement, education, connection, preservation. It's ruled by Vishnu, the god of preservation. Saturn tends to block things. So this is the key thing here. But other possibilities are scientific breakthroughs, treatments, space exploration. We've seen that, of course, internet, that's further being advanced. AI, again, further advanced. Financial challenges are no doubt there, in contrast to the stock markets because of what's going on in Taurus right now with the eclipse, and Mars joined that. And it's kind of like this bull market that's creating this big bubble, basically, but it's not real in another sense because of the economy that's been challenged and the more people out of work than ever. So there's kind of a real contrast situation. A divisiveness, especially during the beginning and end of the year. So we've already had the beginning of the year, which has kind of eased now, that divisiveness has eased, but it will trigger again by the end of the year with the nodes. So mental health challenges and adaptations all year. This is because the sign Shravana is actually associated with the moon, and Saturn, any association with Saturn and the moon shows a lot of possibility for, mental health issues. Big changes and big, continuing. Cyber attacks, I predicted that last year, and they did happen last year, and I predict them again this year. Let me just make sure everyone is muted. And then natural disasters, which I predicted, and we're seeing it already with the floods in Australia. Fires, floods, droughts, and seismic activity. We've just recently had the volcano, which didn't erupt to the extent that I thought it would in Iceland, but I did predict the volcano in Iceland. Further changes and innovations in the workplace, that's kind of obvious, and border and boundary issues continue. Now, this is continuing for a couple of years because Saturn and Pluto remain together in Capricorn until the beginning of 2023, and all boundaries and all borders are challenged when that happens, every time it happens. So that's the kind of general overview theme. One of the main themes, like I said, is Saturn in Shravana. Shravana is all about listening. It's about hearing. This is a form here. You can see Vishnu, which is associated with this. It's a ruler of this sign, Shravana. He's in this reclining pose and he's listening. He's listening to just the inner sounds, and it's all about tuning in and listening within as opposed to listening to people outside. And the problem with Saturn, of course, in any sign is that it can block things, and people don't listen anymore, or people can't hear anymore, or people don't want to hear anymore, whatever it might be. There's a problem with listening right now. And of course, it ties in with education, it ties in with travel. It's a movable lunar mansion. It's all about movement and free movement, and Saturn again puts a block in there. So this is a theme for the rest of the year. It doesn't move out until January 2022. Another big theme, of course, is this, you might have heard this mythological story before about the churning of the oceans of milk, where the gods and demons had to churn the mountain. On top of here, you can see the tortoise, which is basically, or the turtle. This is, the avatar of Saturn, or the Vishnu avatar for Saturn. And so this is Vishnu here, but this is the turtle kind of holding up the mountain and this being churned. This is all, it seems all a bit crazy, but it basically, what it reflects is this sense of the good and the bad, the demons here on this side here, and the gods on this side. So the good and the bad having to thrash it out in order to excrete the goodness from the ocean of milk, which is basically, you could even tie it into the cosmos and the Milky Way and what's going on there, but in terms of our own mental processes, how we thrash about, in our mind with the pros and cons of a situation, and good things coming out of that, as well as, not so good things. So in the mythological story, it was all about this churning created a lot of poisons that came out, but also created the science of Ayurveda and the Amrita and the immortal nectar, which is the cure, which is a big part of that story. So this is the graph that you might have seen before. If you watched this presentation before, I just want to remind you and keep it in context again, that every time Pluto, Saturn, and Jupiter come into conjunction, there's something major going down. So the Black Death from 1347 to 1351, Pluto, Saturn, Jupiter conjunction, estimated 75 to 200 million deaths. The Spanish flu, that was just Pluto and Jupiter. Saturn wasn't even involved then. And yet there was 20 to 50 million deaths estimated. That's how much they don't know. It's like, that's a huge range there. 1918 to 1919. So it was 2 years. And just remember that. Because it takes a couple of years for this sort of to work its way out, really. Then the most recent one was HIV and AIDS, which was in 1981, the kind of when it really started, and that's continuing. At present, there's 32 million deaths so far, and that was again started during a Pluto, Saturn, Jupiter conjunction. Again, we have the same thing starting at the end of 2019, Pluto, Saturn, Jupiter conjunction. So far, an estimated, I think we need to update that since that was back in January, but that was 1.92 million deaths. So it goes in these waves, and this is how, like I said, viruses behave. And also this is an understanding how the planets trigger the nodes each time. So this is a graph that would show you this kind of very clearly, how this is the American graph here for COVID cases. So you can see here in April of last year, and then that was 2020. So April last year, and then it spiked again in August, and then again at the end of the year. And you can see that correlated each time with Jupiter and Pluto coming together, almost exactly. You can see the graphs going together. So Jupiter is a planet of expansion, and ordinarily you would like that to happen, but not when you're talking about Pluto. So that's the key thing. So what's going on at the same time is this North Node called Rahu is in Taurus right now. And although that creates a lot of issues around resources, including the distribution of the vaccine and holding that up or delaying that, or people not trusting that, or whatever it is, Rahu is a shadow. At the same time, it's in a trine to this Jupiter in Capricorn, which is ending now this month. And into April, it will move into Aquarius. And so it's going to sort of even out this kind of bubble that's been created in the stock market, because this trine between these two here has created sort of almost an unreal sense of, what's going on in Taurus. And like I said, Taurus is all about resources. So whether it's resources in terms of money in the bank, or it's resources like things we have in order to overcome our challenges in life, which is the opposite sign, Scorpio. By the way, if anything I'm saying here is just kind of going over your head, this is all explained more clearly in the magazine that's available online. You can read it for free. It's on timelineastrology.com. I talk more, I write about these, and other astrologers have written about these transits in kind of more ways that hopefully you'd understand. So here are the eclipses. I want to just mention these. So let's maybe just focus on the two solar eclipses, okay? Because solar eclipses have a longer impact. So there's a eclipse coming up in June, on June 10th, at 25 degrees of Taurus. And this is very much about that image I showed you earlier of the churning of the oceans with the snake. And this Mrigashirsha is all about, because it's ruled by the god Soma, which is basically this Amrita, this immortal nectar, this elixir of life, this cure, this treatment, whatever it is. And now there's an eclipse coming up in June. So eclipses generally bring something out. They also obstruct things and hide things. And that's why we're also seeing all of this kind of really shady, I would say at the very least, shady activity in terms of the vaccine. Highly unethical approaches, I would say personally, by companies who just want to make money. And for example, in not releasing the formulas or whatever worldwide for the world to be able to make their own generic vaccine. They're not going to do that because they're going to make a lot of money out of distributing the vaccine. So that's one side of it. The other side of it is like companies like AstraZeneca, the recent confusion around blood clots. So there's a lot that when you have the eclipses going on, like just as you have here, the sun, in this case, it's an annular eclipse, so there's this ring around the sun or the moon. So you have this ring kind of shape. So it does reveal things. So it brings things out into the open, but it can also obscure things. It can hide things, and so we're not going to know the full picture right away. But by June and this eclipse, I think that there's going to be some developments for sure in terms of the vaccine and treatment. Then by the end of the year, there's a total solar eclipse in Scorpio. That's the one I mentioned in December 4th. This is the one I think that even though it might trigger another wave, I think that this is the one that we're going to see really the world sort of really overcome this virus. Because it's the South Node and Mars together, which are very strong together in Scorpio. And even though, like I said, it might be another kind of, it could be like a healing crisis where it kind of comes into another wave, but at the same time, I think that it will be really overcome moving into 2022. So they're the main eclipses for the year to take note of. June is going to be quite a volatile period, June, July. And because we have an eclipse at that same time with Mars in Cancer opposite Saturn, there's going to be a lot of protests, a lot of restraints, a lot of people getting very angry, and a lot of developments though at the same time. And then the end of the year, then again, I think things will move on in a big way. So this is the chart, the South Indian chart on the right. This is the North Indian on the left. This is the chart for the 12th of April. And why would I bring up the 12th of April? Well, because that is seen as the Lunar New Year. So things are going to start shifting in April, as I said. There's going to be a more hopeful, more positive, more optimistic approach by mid-April. That's not just because Jupiter is moving into Aquarius. That's a big part of it, though. But the Sun is about to move into Aries, where it's exalted at its strongest. And Mars is about to leave here, where it's been with the North Node, creating a lot of obstructions, another wave of the virus as well. And then as soon as it moves into Gemini on the 16th of April, it'll break this spell really of the nodes, because you see here, Rahu and Ketu are the nodes, and planets are just on one side. This is the Kala Sarpa Yoga I mentioned. This snake of time, this serpent of time, creates a very lopsided view of the zodiac, and it creates a very one-sided approach, a very extreme situation, and a very uncertain situation. And this is what's been broken in April. And so we can see from April that there is some spell been broken in a way. And in terms of the virus, that will be a more positive shift. But this is the new lunar year, and you draw a chart for each capital, for each country, based on this chart on the new moon in Pisces, not Aries. The new moon in the Indian system is calculated for Pisces for the new year ahead. And in this case, it's at 28 degrees of Pisces, near the very end of Pisces. And so it itself is like a beginning, but requiring an end. Every beginning is an end. So this end really, is showing that there are some, for the new year ahead, again, these nodes and the planets all on one side of the nodes, there's still a lot of uncertainty until next April, unfortunately, April 2022. So that's one thing. There's a lot of uncertainty hanging around in the air, even though, like I said, after the middle of April, when Mars moves, Sun moves, all of that, there will be this temporary sort of sense of optimism and energy, and something kind of being more clear, or we're more confident in things and in people, and in leaders especially. But that's temporary, and the overall theme for the year is still this kind of things hemmed in. Again, you can just literally see it here, like all the planets are on one side. So this really is the energy for the year ahead again, unfortunately. And we have to lean into the uncertainty, as I keep telling people. And we do need to keep a balance between these two signs in particular, because this is where the nodes are hemming in, Taurus and Scorpio. So Taurus, again, is all about resources. It's all about the economy and wealth and good times and enjoyments, all the nice things in life. But it is also about the cure, the vaccine. Rahu in Taurus is all about, can also be about hoarding. So we're seeing lots of countries hoarding the vaccine, for example, but even personally hoarding, could be hoarding resources. While Ketu in Scorpio is all about overcoming difficulty and fear of the virus, or whatever it might be. And so that's the big theme for the year, really. Because by the following April 2022, the nodes will have moved out of these signs. There's a completely different feel by the end of, by April 2022. Because Saturn is about to move into Aquarius at that point. Jupiter will move into Pisces, its own sign, it's stronger there. The nodes will break this spell here and move into Aries, Libra. There's a completely different feel April 2022. And so April 2021, it's still, we're dealing with a lot of uncertainty. Now, the good news, as I said, is that Jupiter is about to move into Aquarius. So that is within this new year chart. So that's a really great thing. Because again, Jupiter is at its weakest in Capricorn. So as soon as it comes out of Capricorn, there's this sense of lift. So we're having a sense of something new. So second last slide, I would say, before I look at the long term, and maybe just look at my predictions for the year, maybe look at them again. These are the predictions I made in January. So further changes and innovations in the workplace, that's quite obvious, I guess, but that's all to do with Capricorn. Further unrest, obvious contrast between individual freedoms and the needs of the many. Stock markets continue to fluctuate. By the way, if you're in the stock market and you're looking at like the bull markets and the bubble that's been created at the moment, I'm not saying that it's going to be a huge adjustment, but I think there's going to be an adjustment as soon as Jupiter moves into Aquarius in April. So if you're in it for the long term, then it's not going to, affect you so much. But if you're trading in the short term, I guess, just to be mindful of that, the possibility of the stock market, adjusting at the very least. I'm not saying there's going to be a bust, but there's definitely an adjustment by April. The economy is though challenged all year. Even when Jupiter moves out of Aquarius, at least it's no longer debilitated, like completely depressed. It is like a lighter feel, and there's a sense of like innovations and all of that coming about. But it's still challenged all year because remember, Jupiter has to go back into depression in September, October, November. The government climate controls, conservation orders, that's all about Shravana in particular and the sign Capricorn. That's nothing new. Scientific breakthroughs, we've seen a lot of those, like huge breakthroughs, and we haven't really paid attention to them because of the pandemic, but there's been so much breakthrough in terms of what's possible in the future for overcoming so many different diseases, not just viruses. I won't go into detail, but like, those scientists who came out with their findings this last year. Technological advancements, new medical treatments will be a result, of course. Further challenges to EU, obviously, Ireland, Scotland, Wales, all of those, or any borders really in the world are challenged during Saturn-Pluto conjunction. So I mentioned in the last presentation about the 20-year curse for the US president. So now we're talking about Biden, and I do not think he's going to see out his term. I don't even think he's going to see out the year, possibly into the new year, where Kamala Harris then will become president, because his chart reflects some losses by the end of the year. Pandemic and Brexit create problems, of course, with supply chains. Again, it's all about Taurus, Scorpio. Big businesses, industries, governments attempt to maintain control. This is an ongoing theme of Saturn Pluto, because as the systems are really challenged, they'll also really dig their heels in and try and maintain more control than previously. So you're seeing that in governments around the world trying to keep people in order. By the way, this isn't going to last forever. Saturn Pluto, it's, by the, next year it eases up, next summer, and then by 2023 they've split apart. So if you think this is going to be forever, obviously nothing is forever. Planets don't stop moving. Uprisings continue against these controls, of course. We're going to see that, like I said, majorly in the summer, I think, and then again in the autumn, especially October, November. Big changes in China and US, but this is just the tip of the iceberg of the changes that are going to happen in China and the US in the next few years. China, especially in the next many years. That's because Pluto is in Capricorn, and Capricorn is the rising sign for China. And then for the US, Capricorn is the second sign of finances. So I'm talking about the dollar here in terms of it likely being demoted. Borders and boundaries continue to feel tension. That's something I talked about already. New global lines drawn. That happens every time Saturn Pluto come together. We've already seen Brexit. We might see more. Things begin to heat up in the Middle East again. We're already seeing that. I predicted that in January. And as soon as Biden came in, there's going to be, you can see that developing already. Fires and global disasters such as floods, we've already seen that starting to take place. Droughts, we've seen that. Famine, we've seen that. Yemen and what's going on there, and many other places, I'm sure, as well throughout the year. It's all about, again, resources. This is the thing, Taurus, Scorpio. When the nodes were in Taurus, Scorpio in the past, we had like the famine in Ethiopia. So now they're here again, and we have the famine in Yemen. And then finally, the major attacks, including cyber attacks. And that is going to continue, and especially at the end of the year again. So the big picture, just to finish it up. The big picture is, where do I even begin? Saturn and Pluto have been together for such a long time. They don't normally stay together for this long, but because of the transits and the way they work out this time, it's normally just a couple of years, 2.5 years. This time it's been spread out over 6 years. So unfortunately, this is why we've experienced this in such a heavy way, because Saturn and Pluto represent this kind of end times feel, and that feels like that, you know, and all of these kind of big issues and big themes come about in terms of not just the pandemic, but in terms of global, like climate change and all of that, and just where is humanity headed, really. And so this is why it's been dragged out a lot longer this time. The last time they were together was in the 80s, the early 80s. That was during the AIDS crisis. So the other one then is that as soon as Saturn and Pluto break up by 2023, then Saturn starts to move towards Neptune by 2025 to 2028. So that's definitely where something new is coming in, like where the lines are being blurred even more. So whatever restrictions are put in place now, and we can obviously see that they could be in place for some time, even if it's just that the way we travel has changed forevermore. Then by Saturn Neptune, things get a bit blurry. And you know, that's not a bad thing, of course, but it just means that, you know, like for example, the Berlin Wall came down during the Saturn Neptune conjunction. So it's like it just blurs lines as opposed to puts up borders. It kind of blurs borders again. So there might be this opening up more so by mid-decade. And also at that same time, Jupiter will be in Cancer, where it's actually exalted, where it's really strong by 2022, 26, or 25, 26. So by mid-decade, there is definitely a sense of something new coming online, something new happening. But then, and I know this is looking way ahead, but by the beginning of next decade, Saturn comes together with Uranus 2030 to 2035 as they come together in one sign and move into Gemini. So at that time also, Jupiter and Pluto will come together again in Capricorn, and they'll oppose the Saturn Uranus in Gemini 2032, 2033. That's when I think there'll be a massive crash. So banking crash and all of that. And so that's when I think that the world is going to change in even a bigger way than we're experiencing now, because the nodes will come back to the signs that they triggered the virus, and it does it every 10 years. And by the way, that's been predicted, you know, by a psychic. You might have read that in the past, that she was very accurate about that when she said that there would be a pandemic in 2020 and that it would come back 10 years later. And when I heard that as an astrologer, and I know that the nodes come back around again 10 years time, the possibility is very high then that that's another, you know, something, whether it's a pandemic or not, but a crash, a complete overhaul of the financial system by the early 2030s. And I don't even know what that's going to look like, because I just think that this is actually probably even more impactful than what we experienced in 2020 in some ways. Now, it doesn't have, you know, the Saturn Pluto that was going on in 2020, thankfully, so it doesn't feel like end times necessarily. It might feel more like beginning times, like something new, like some new financial way of dealing, or some new whatever. I don't know if it just means cryptocurrencies overtake everything else. I don't know, because I'm not an expert in that, but I just know that it's going to be a complete change in the way we run everything. The way we trade, the way we travel, the way we do everything is going to change in that period. So that's the long term. So that's it. That's my predictions for the year and kind of beyond. And just to mention that, thank you for the artwork to Samir Rana. He's the artist. RanaSamir.com is the website. He put together these images for me. And just to mention before I leave it, for questions for anyone who's here live to ask questions, just want to remind you that I do have this patronage on the website. If you want to go into astrology more in depth, I do daily reports as well as monthly forecasts and horoscopes. So I do like a forecast for each sign, a video forecast. And then I have this astrology study group as well. Some patrons on the group are astrologers themselves, so they like to study astrology with other people. We do sample charts or case studies. And then I call this the Scorpio Video Club, where I just share some of the secrets of in astrology, how we read charts. So you can go to Patreon, it's called, even though it's Patron, they call it Patreon. timeline astrology, or just go to timelineastrology.com and then you can follow the link there if you want to join up. I think it's $5 or so, €4 something a month. It's not much. You can go to higher tiers, but for $4-5, you get a lot of content for that each month. So thank you for listening, everyone. And for those who are here live, I'll take your questions, and wish you all the very best for the rest of the year.